You are listening to The Only Constant, a podcast where we go beyond the usual discussions in technology and business and aim to explore more than explain. Join me for engaging discussions with a diverse range of global thought leaders as we seek to uncover new perspectives and insights in a free-flowing conversation. My guest today is Dr. Jeffrey Funk, and I am your host, Lasse. Hi, Jeffrey, and welcome to The Only Constant. I'm really happy to have you here on this episode, and I've been really looking forward to this episode with you.
My pleasure.
Right now, you have a lot of rain where you're at, so if people are hearing a lot of background noise, it's Singapore rain, isn't it?
Well, we get 120 inch. We got 120 inches last year, and usually it's 90 inches.
That's amazing, but it sounds really aggressive here. It sounds like something is hailing or something like that. But let's just kick this off with a question and see where it takes us. So the hype train, Jeff. I've been following you a long time on LinkedIn, and this is something where you're very outspoken and have a very clear voice in the market on hype and how hype is forming us and how we are overhyping technologies that without necessarily waiting for them to give us real value. So my question is right now is we're on it, right? And you can elaborate on how you see that we're on it and your experience in working with hype technology. But can we get off it again? And what does it take to get off it?
Well, I didn't always think there was a lot of hype. I used to be a very big techno-optimist. I have a bachelor's in physics. I got my PhD in engineering at Carnegie Mellon. Worked in a semiconductor factory. I did a lot of work with different companies, and in about 2000, for instance, I was happened to be living in Japan, and the mobile internet took off over there. And I was very optimistic about that. And people were telling me, no, the Japanese people are different. That's why it's succeeding there. And I said, no, it's the standards aren't set, the devices aren't good. But once those problems are solved, then you'll have a successful mobile internet. And I kind of forgot about it. So I went on and did everything because
Hmm.
the rest of the world wasn't interested. And then in 2007, Apple introduced the iPhone and then an app store in 2008, and it succeeded.
Mm.
And my book, my 2004 book, Mobile Disruption, talked about all the technologies and applications. Most of the things that I wrote came true. And then after 2008, I was in Singapore and I was teaching a course on the economics of new technologies. And I was still an optimist, and I was talking about all these technologies and the trends in them. They're all doing well. And then I began to notice after a few years, by 2012, I began to notice that a lot of these technologies, they weren't really experiencing any improvements. And I would go, nanotechnology, I'd teach it the next year or the next semester. And I couldn't find anything new to say. It was all just what existed. So I gradually became a pessimist. Around 2014, I began to notice all the losses for startups, 2015. So that by 2017, 2018, had become a big pessimist. And I wrote an article for Issues in Science Technology on technology hype. That if you put in the keywords technology hype into Google, it will come up because it's been cited, read so many times. And so I gradually become a bigger pessimist as time has gone on, because people keep coming up with new technologies and saying the same things that they said about the old technologies, not reflecting for a moment that, okay, we said this about the last technology and it didn't succeed. Maybe we should be a little more reflective and look for some details, look for something that should be there.
Mm. But that reminds me of how I used to reflect on the hype market a couple of years ago. That everyone was always looking at it in a very synchronous manner. Like right now, this is super exciting, and sort of like things emerged out of nothing and to change the world. actually, to me, it had a religious flavor to it that I thought was weird. Well, and I think that some of those perspectives lacked a diachrome view, like what happened before and how is it changing society in the long run. And aren't you also afraid that if you look back 20 years, a lot of things have actually impacted our world and changed our world? We've had a lot of impact from technology as well. Also, a lot of hype technology that actually maybe not took over the world immediately, but in concert with other technologies, sort of moved it into a different place. And you're afraid that you're also speaking from a very synchrone, like right now moment, instead of looking at the integral instead of the differential. I like to say.
Well, as I said, most of my life I've been an optimist. So in the 2000s, I was optimistic about mobile phones, but then social media came on, and I was probably too optimistic about that. Then the iPad came out in 2012, so tablet computers became something big. But after that, it's kind of hard to find these things. You see electric vehicles,
Mm.
you see organic loading mini diodes, you see solar cells, but there's a long list of other technologies that have received a lot of attention but haven't done that well, from VR and AR to delivery drones to Hyperloop. It's a very long list.
But it also took a long time for the iPhone to become a thing. As you said, you predicted it many, many years before. And maybe it's because of these technologies had to come together in a different format. My point is there's a difference perhaps between foundational basic research and consumer tech. And maybe that's also what we're doing right now. We're mistaking something that is maybe basic foundational research for consumer tech.
Well, in the case of the iPhone, there wasn't a set of standards that could make the content work with the phones. So in
Mm,
Japan, the service providers, and also in Korea, the service providers determined what the specs of the phones are, and then the phone manufacturers made it for them. And they even made WAP work, which was the technology in Europe. But
mm,
there was big disagreements between Nokia and other handset manufacturers and the service providers. They couldn't get agreement on it, uh,
mm,
and and so there was no content for the mobile phone. So it took a lot of technology improvement before phones could actually handle internet content, and that's
mm,
what Steve Jobs finally did. They also did in Japan about the same time, but that enabled the mobile phones to work. So it was a standards issue, also a technology issue, and uh, Steve Jobs did an app store. And I actually was, a lot of us in Japan were pushing for app stores and apps back in 2003, 2004. Um, and finally, I got introduced, but you needed, which I didn't realize until later, is you needed a certain amount of memory on the phone before you could have these app stores because these apps took a lot of memory. And so
mm.
once there was enough memory, then you could have the app stores. And so suddenly, and with these apps, the content looked a lot better, worked a lot better. So those kinds of issues may exist now in some things. You've got standard issues in virtual reality and augmented reality and technologies like this. But in a lot of the cases, it's not standards. It's just that the technology is not yet good enough. It's not improving very quickly. And if you look at the details, you'll see that it's not improving very quickly. I mean, I have gone through most of these technologies and looked at their improvements, and you'll see a very slow rate of improvement. And people don't pay attention to that. People don't say, okay, it's not better than it was before. What they'll say is that, oh, somebody else introduced a new product. Uh, and there's a lot of emphasis on that. Oh, there's all these new products coming out. And so to people, a lot of people, what's key is that lots of new products are coming out, but the products aren't really significantly better than the previous ones. And that's what you need. Think
Mm.
of Moore's law and how those integrated circuits have gotten better through all these years. Think of bandwidth for internet, how fat that's gotten better for so many years. These things are required, but they're hard to do for a lot of technology. So a lot of these technologies just aren't ready.
And what is your take then on the generative AI craze here? Right, I think there's some. They always most of the graphs I see a improvement in quality and reduction in hallucinations are completely aligned to the amount of data you're training it on. And how much data do you think we can actually find? Do you have exponential data growth to train it on, or what do you think is the problem with the AI technology?
Well, like the other technologies I was talking about, people get excited about generative AI because there's constantly new products coming out, which is the wrong
Mm,
focus. Yeah, all these new products are coming out, but they don't reduce the number of hallucinations. They don't actually
mm,
make the technology better for a business person to use. And if you look at AI from the standpoint of like 40 years, what has happened is that expert systems, when I was doing my PhD at Carnegie Mellon, expert systems were the big thing. They got replaced by neural networks because of Moore's law. It became all this computing power made it possible to do with neural networks what could not be done with expert systems. And in the more recent years, that's also contributed to the improvements in these generative AI products. So they've become, but now there's a lot of, there's been over the last few years a lot of realization that we can't just keep doing this. So Sam Altman has said there'll be no more big models, but without those big
mm.
models, they probably aren't going to get better. Now, even if we had the big models, it's not clear that things will get better, because what a lot of people forget is that when you're going from 90 to 100%, when you really are trying to reduce those hallucinations and make a better product, you don't just go from 91, 92, 93, 94, 95, and so on. That isn't how exponential improvements. You go 90%, 10% bad, then you improve by 40%, so you get 4% bad. Then you
Mm.
go, 40% improvement, you get, a couple of percent bad, and so on and so on. It takes a long time to get to zero point 0.1 hallucination, zero point zero 0.01
Mm.
hallucination, 0.001 hallucination. The same problem exists with driverless vehicles. It takes a lot longer than people think to actually reduce all these edge cases, to get rid of all these mistakes. Um, and and yet we have this situation where it's very hard to make the computers any bigger. You can make, it may be hard to get the data too, as you're saying, but the real hard problem, but you certainly cannot get more and more computers, because we're basically at the tail end of the computing paradigm. What we're seeing is the uh, Moore's law is slowing. It's becoming more expensive to make those improvements, and so it's hard for me to be optimistic unless we see something happen, something
But this
change.
is actually a really big thing, Jeff. If we see that, if you say the Moore's law is slowing down, that's something that's been driving revenue and growth in the Western world and the whole world for a couple for decades now, and you see that slowing down. What will that mean in the bigger societal terms of that?
Well, it's impacting a lot of electronic products, from VR, AR, wearables. Phones certainly aren't getting as better as fast as they used to. Neither are
Mm.
computers. So it's a lot of the whole electronic revolution is kind of going away. At least it's slowing down. So that's one of the reasons for why I'm pessimistic.
Mm. Stephen Pemberton said that Moore's law, he believed that was the only constant, exponential change and exponential growth. And he was betting on it to continue because he said over his long career, he's 70 today, and everyone has multiple times said that Moore's law is coming to an end, but it hasn't. He said, and now you're saying it again, aren't you? Isn't that why are you saying it with such certainty, Jeff?
Well, because I've looked very closely at the data. There's an article where ideas are hard are ideas getting harder to find, where the MIT and
Mm,
Stanford researchers look at the improvements in Moore's law, and then also looked at the amount of resources it took to make those improvements. So much more resources are needed today than they were 20 years ago to improve Moore's law. You
mm,
also have that the costs aren't coming down like they used to. So you see, when Gordon Moore published his paper in 1965, he didn't really talk about the number of transistors on chip. He talked about costs coming down. And then
mm,
people realized that there was a pretty good relationship between costs coming down and the number of transistors on the chip increasing. So you have more transistors on a chip, so every transistor gets smaller. Every transistor gets smaller, so every transistor needs less material costs, equipment costs, all kinds of things. And they also got faster because the distances between the transistors were smaller, so electrons had shorter path to follow. But then what happened is that there were all these heat problems about 15 years ago that started. So then they had to keep reducing the voltages. They couldn't use the same voltages. They also were there was another problem. They Yeah, I'm trying to remember. There was another problem that I know that they started to do things in parallel. They couldn't do them
Mm.
in series anymore, so they started to do them in parallel. But the problem is, it's very hard to do for a general purpose processor. Keep making things be done more and more and more in parallel. It's easier with a video chip. So I looked at these things, and as I looked at them, and I listened to people who are really close to the technology, I realized that it was slowing down. That they were saying that the number of transistors per chip continued to increase, but yet it was taking more resources to achieve that. In addition, the speeds weren't going up, um, and the costs weren't coming down. This is a really important thing. The costs used to come down. The costs don't come down anymore. This is a big problem for AI because the costs are going up. The computer resources are increasing, which means higher costs, which means more energy usage, more water usage. So you have all this sustainability people upset, right, about this now.
Mm. I think so many in so many people are betting on the hockey stick model of how to solve, for instance, the climate crisis and everything else, that will just come up with new technology. We've been used to having this exponential technological growth all the time. And so what you're saying is actually dire news for that. If we are indeed slowing down, will we have to work with what we have now and make that work better? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I think it's in lots of technologies, but also in clean energy too, and it's in lots of other aspects of life.
Mm,
People underestimate how hard it is to make improvements to a technology. They don't realize. I used to spend when I taught my course in economics and new technology. I was looking at the rates of improvements for all these technologies. Most don't improve. People don't
mm,
realize that if you look at VR and AR, they don't get smaller. They look at
mm.
Hyperloop, they don't. It doesn't get faster. When you look at these technologies, they're not really getting better. What you see is what you get, and yet what people are betting on is that they're going to get a lot better. And what
Mm.
in reality they aren't getting better. And if you push,
Virtual reality is still these big goggles, right? This
yeah, they're
virtual
so
reality is
big.
still this big weird. Yeah.
And I didn't realize the problem until a few years ago when I finally found an article talking about how it's not the electronics that's a problem; it's the optics. That when you try to
Mm,
make the uh, the optics smaller, the field of view goes down. So if you look at the field of view for augmented reality for like Google glasses versus an Oculus Rift glasses, the field of view is very very narrow, and this
mm,
is this is part of optics, and it's very hard to break this law of optics. And what most amazed me about finding this out is that it wasn't ever talked about, even though if you
mm,
found the top optics people, they say yeah. And I think this exists so often is that we're ignoring all of these things. We kind of have this superficial conversation about how easy it is for tech to occur. And if you talk about this, no, 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 it's so easy. But it's not. It's not
mm,
easy. And that's why a lot of these technologies aren't doing well. A lot of companies they've kind of assumed that everything's going to get better. And therefore, I've got to aim for the biggest market when really they
mm,
should be aiming for those people who have the highest willingness to pay for some new technology and perhaps the willingness to put up with the lowest performance. But they're
mm.
not. They're looking for the main market because they think that everything's happening so fast. And we got to go for the main market because if we go for this niche market, then somebody else will get to the main market before us and we'll lose. And the
Yeah.
result
So it's a
is
stress. Yeah.
no market takes off, or very few of these markets take off. They grow very slowly.
But actually, you're bridging very well into something I want to speak to you about as well. So I think that the problem with the optics really is a problem with the human interface, because our eyes were at the limit to some extent to VR, and I really think that it's almost a very beautiful, almost poetic way to look at tech, that we have our eyes as a limit to how small glasses we can do. And that also, the Ian Barking in the first episode of my podcast said, as the only constant was the laws of enterprise physics. So it's sort of the same. Who say laws of enterprise biology, right? It's
Yeah.
the anatomy of an enterprise, and that brings me to a question on business value and AI. Is a new emerging technology, is that a good enough justification for a strategic refocus for enterprises? Because that's what you're hearing. All the big research companies saying that you should refocus now in the age of AI and do everything differently. But I also see a lot of companies being like, "Hey, we've heard this before. What's your take on that? How do you make value from this? Or can we
Well,
make value? But is it even ready for value?"
what I find so odd is that people are always talking about what AI can do. They're not talking about what AI is doing right now. I mean, there are some successful use cases, but not very
Yes.
many. But they mostly talk about
Social media.
can do or will do.
Mm,
I mean, you look at articles and they keep using can and will. They aren't
yeah,
using is doing this, right?
yeah.
And you look at the past technologies and they all had some killer application, big application where it would work, where there was a lot of cases where it was working. I mean,
Mm,
and for instance, I hear people saying, well, research assistants, that's going to be a really big application. I think, well, a research assistant. Okay. The problem is, this isn't anything like the word processing was, where you have one word processing system, everybody can use it.
mm,
Everybody was using the same kind of word processing system 40 years ago.
yeah,
It started
yeah.
with that. Spreadsheets, the same way. Now you look at a research assistant. Well, the biotech researcher needs a different research assistant than the automobile research engineer. You see, basically, the problem is that everybody needs a different research assistant because everyone's dealing with different knowledge and skills, and there's all these different words. And if you want to have the accuracy of these research systems be very high, you're going to have to customize them for a certain set of workers. Okay, we can do that, but that's going to require work. And that's one of the things that
Mm.
I keep saying is that it requires a lot more work than people are saying. They think it's so easy. Okay,
It's
yeah,
because
you
the
can come up
foundational
with it.
models bridge things, right?
And so if you come up with a research assistant, and see, it may even be for different companies because companies are very concerned about not letting any of their data out and things. They also are going to have different product names, different words and things. And so the level of customization that we need to make these research systems is going to be very high. And the same thing with chatbots, right? If you're going to offer a chatbot for your customers, it has to work for your customers. You can't use
Mm.
the same one. The biotech firm can't use the same one that the automobile company is using or the consumer goods company is using. Everybody needs a different one. So, yeah, they can work, but it will take a while. And companies are looking at this and they're saying this is expensive, right? And they're trying to find
Mm.
where can they make money on it. And you hear stories about these drive-through restaurants that that can't that the chatbots don't work, and so they have to have these remote workers in the Philippines who are stepping in when the chatbots don't work. Now that's going to slow down throughput. And throughput is really important for a fast food restaurant, a drive-through restaurant. Um,
Yeah.
that doesn't mean they won't succeed. It's just that it's a lot harder than people are making it out to be. And so I spend my time saying people have to really be honest and write down all the problems and how well things can work. People are like, no, 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 just go for it. Just go, go, go. This is going to happen. It's only going to happen if we're really good engineers.
Yeah, but that also, what is it already doing? I think that's no, that you said that in the beginning. That's a good point as well, because we've had AI in there's AI in a lot of tools we're using today. My Google Maps has an AI. There's AI in Facebook and every social media, and yet people are like, "Oh, now we have AI." But the problem is that AI is what software and computers can't do, isn't it? And whenever they can do it, we call it something else. Like now, we call it Google Maps. So we can't identify AI for all the AI we already have
Yeah,
to some extent.
yeah. We're applying AI to a lot of things that that didn't have AI before, but that pretty much worked. And then we
Yeah.
apply AI and we say, well, look how good the AI is. Well, it's hard to say if the AI has added anything.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, but I think one of the things you also said is, with the drive-throughs, is that I think people are looking at this technology now and saying, okay, this is AI, and the whole public discourse about it, and the scaremongering, and the bad press that is also good press, where there's some with Altman and Elon Musk saying this is going to kill the world and we have to be careful, uh, which is definitely a marketing thing, because if people see, oh, this is don't play with fire, then the first thing people will do is play with fire. So I think the whole notion of AI and this being aggressive, people expect Skynet, right? Is that we expect it to be autonomous, to be able to save or kill Sarah Connor on its own.
Yeah.
And I think we need to go back a couple of steps. So we've had autonomous vehicles for 10, 12 years, and they actually drive really neatly, right? They're really good drivers, but they have these they drive better with fewer accidents than humans do, but we still don't allow them on the road. So are we asking the wrong questions of this when we ask it to be autonomous? Should we ask it to be, first of all, just something that analyzes data a little bit differently, or becomes an assistant, augments us a little bit, but with human in the loop? Is that where we should look? Or what is the problem? What is the problem with autonomous vehicles as well, Jeffrey?
Well, it's augmented AI has always been the better approach. Technology always improves incrementally. There are none of these big breakthroughs that happen all at once. Those don't
Mm,
happen, or at least
no.
very, very rarely. It's always incremental improvements. And it's the words though that comes from business schools where they talk about disruptive technology and radical technology. And what they don't realize is that every radical technology, every disruptive start improves incrementally. Now, maybe when you compare it to the existing technology, yeah, it looks completely different. But when you look at the disruptive radical technology in its early years, it's all incremental improvement, slow improvement, and and it's improvement in labs or independent researchers, and then it gets one application, and then it gets better, another application, another. It's all incremental improvements. And
Mm.
people have kind of forgotten about that, partly because of business schools hyping these things up, the words they use, disruptive technology, radical technology. And they act as though this stuff is very easy, but it's not. It's very hard.
But don't you think? Okay, so this now I'm gonna take this high flying a little bit. So the incremental improvement, I actually agree with that. I'm an educated historian, and historians have this tendency to view all revolutions as bogus. Basically, like no, 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 no. Like the French Revolution, yeah, it created a lot of chaos, and then you ended up with an even more autocratic regime afterwards than you had before. So the conservative approach sort of wins, at least for a generation. And this brings me back to my chat with Stephen Pemberton a couple of episodes back, where he said that people have to die. The old generation has to die for people to really start working with the new one. And then I said, "Oh, that's harsh." And he said, "No, we don't have to get killed. So let's just put that immediately there."
Yeah,
But that people don't adapt to. He uses Gutenberg press. People didn't adapt to it immediately. It took 50 years before they started making content lists and page numbers after they could print books. The first TV shows were basically read out loud radio on a screen, and the first cars were people sitting in the front like a horse cart, right? You see these weird pictures. Actually, it looks really weird if you think about it that way. So, don't you think that maybe some of the technologies we are seeing now, they are actually game changing? They're actually revolutionary, but we will not see it for 20, 30 years. It will take time for people to actually, maybe we need to die.
yeah. Maybe it will take a long time, but I think that a lot of people, when they say that the existing users have to die, what they're implying is that the reason why the technology diffuses slowly is because the first users are very are resisting it,
Hmm.
and that goes on. That certainly goes on. But that's not the problem here. The problem is the new technology isn't just that good. It isn't as good as
Hmm.
the proponents are claiming it, and it's going to take a long time to improve. Now, if those resistive people were less resistive and innovated and figured out how to do it better, yeah, it would probably work better. But it isn't like these young AI people claiming that all everybody has to do is just stop being a boomer. right? So I'm one of the,
Mm.
I'm a boomer. Uh, like as if we've caused all the problems and it's just us not do anything. What these people don't realize is that productivity growth started slowing in 1970. I was 14 years old there. I tell you, I have nothing to do with the slowdown in productivity. And my father was about late 30s, which meant he had a lot more power than I did, but still he didn't have the big power. It was my
Mm.
grandfather's generation who
Mm.
was in power then. And probably there were the changes that caused the productivity growth to slow probably started before then. So it may have been my great great grandfather's generation that we need to hold responsible for this. So, we got to be careful when we start to claim that, oh, if just those boomers will die out and then we'll all just be using this technology so much and it will just diffuse and the productivity growth is going to take off.
But Stephen is 70, so it was his words. It's not mine.
Yeah.
So, but I think so. You're actually saying that you believe it is a tech deficit and not an adoption deficit, basically.
Mostly, yes. I think mostly. I mean, there are adoption problems. I mean, I have a big problem with, there's a great book called The Tyranny of Metrics, which created
Mm.
all these detailed metrics people. I think this is a big mistake. You need people to step back and look at things more broadly, but they're too busy into some really tiny metric. So companies could do better if they did that, but they don't do that, and they hire people to fit these very narrow roles. They don't really try to
Mm.
hire anybody who's actually stepping back and thinking about things. So
Mm.
there are changes like this that have happened that I think have slowed down innovation, and certainly there are big changes in academic research that I pointed to. Just the whole emphasis on academic papers. We didn't have so many academic papers
Mm.
50 years ago. 50
No,
years
no.
ago, there was only one Nature journal. Now there's 200 or something. Forget the exact
Yeah, I
number.
think I think that alludes to something I tried to get you to speak about earlier. Is that we are too impatient with technology and with research. We want bang for the buck
Yeah,
immediately. So we don't let things ripen anymore. We don't sit down and mull. We don't make time for contemplation. And it's just production, produce research paper. I know you're a researcher, so all of the people in the research institutions I speak to, also from when I was studying history, they were so totally stressed about this need to constantly produce
yeah,
research paper instead of taking the time to produce what was really necessary. I think what was it? Newton didn't even publish his theories, right? Just to put the extreme case,
yeah.
just he just thought
Yeah.
about it for 40 years, didn't publish it. That's it. So, but
Well,
we have to publish all the time, right? And are we harvesting the fruits before they're ripe? Also with technology, are we talking about blockchain before we should talk about blockchain? Are we talking about metaverse before it's even a thing?
yeah. Well, somebody noticed in 2012 that Einstein and Feynman had Richard Feynman had age indexes of about 40, which is nothing in today's world. Apparently, since
Mm.
then they've gone up because people noticed it and they're kind of embarrassed that they were so low. But 40 is nothing, right? These guys,
Mm.
I mean, Einstein spent his time thinking about things, not just writing
Yeah.
papers. Now we have these smart people. They've become administrators. They're writing so many papers, usually not by themselves, not so they don't have time to think. No, they're administrator. They have all these PhD students, all these postdoc students who they write papers with, and who they have to write letters of recommendation for. So we have some of these
Mm.
greatest minds in America who are basically administrators. It's very
So
sad,
we've
but we've
made the,
done this.
but this is we've basically made these people, these smart people, into something that could be replaced by AI because they're just synthesizing information and writing recommendations, right? So
Well,
we've
you're raising a very good point because this is why many academics, I think, believe in AI. They believe in AI more than non-academics because they're used to doing this type of work. They're used to
mm,
uh, particularly statistical work, and so they kind of think that a lot of their papers are statistical, very statistical nature, and therefore AI can do that better. When the
yeah.
problem is, we should be doing less of that statistical and more about the ideas, more about trying to make a prototype, thinking about what it's going to take to for this technology to be commercializable by companies. So they need to be doing a
Mm.
different set of activities than we have them doing today.
So we're in a constant research preview and never in a real research mode.
Well, it's a constant
So
treadmill. Everyone's on a treadmill, and nobody
yeah.
and people need to stop and get off the treadmill and to rethink the way we're doing things.
Hmm. But how do we get then from this is another thing I wanted to talk to you about, because this is something that you've specialized in as well. So how do we get from these ideas that are currently underthought, basically, and into 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 well functioning startups, that because you've spoken a lot about the startup economy and how there's a big failure rate, lack of profitability, over evaluations. What is the problem, and how do we fix that? How do we
Well,
fix the ideas?
the first problem is choosing the right business, and a lot of the businesses that startups have pursued, don't really have a big chance of succeeding. Uh, yeah, they have a
Mm,
small chance, and maybe they will, but it's not a big chance. It's not like semiconductors were. They were so much better than vacuum tubes. It was obvious, which caused
mm,
computers to be so much better than adding machines. Uh, so part of the problem is that startups do a lot of businesses that really are lousy, and that's the biggest thing that impacts on profitability is what you're what you've chosen to pursue, and that gets
mm,
completely ignored. It's all, oh, no, 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 no. It's whether they grow fast enough, then they can, and if they pursue growth for too long, well, they can stop and they can pursue profitability. Well, if they've decided to pursue an idea that isn't that great, then they're not going to succeed. Now, if they choose a technology, for the ones that have actually chosen a technology that has the chance to be much better than existing businesses, then the problem is, as I said earlier, is that they're oftentimes aiming at the mainstream market, assuming that the rate of improvement will be so great that they can just aim for that, when they should be trying to find those users who would be willing to put up with high prices, low performance. You got to find those users, those first users.
mm. Yeah, so you move for the both a lot of customers, and a slow sales cycle, right? So quick sales, a lot of customers immediately, instead of saying, okay, it's okay that we do slow sales and then get the right customers immediately in the first place, so we can refine the technology. You immediately move to see, can this become a unicorn, and then in a year you say, oh, it didn't become a unicorn. Let's kill it. Is that the problem?
But I've only talked about what startups should be doing differently. You alluded to another point, which is what the whole R&D system should be doing. So we have all these professors
Mm,
writing all these papers, and that's a harder question. How we can move things, increase the chances that more technology will be commercialized, more university research will be
mm,
commercialized. I mean, part of the problem is we emphasize too much publication of papers, and too much publication of papers in very narrow, what I call hyper specialized journals. Um,
mm.
for some technologies, though, there's an easier way, and that is focusing on the performance metrics. So a lot of technologies have metrics that pretty well describe how well they work. So number of transistors per chip, uh, energy storage density for batteries. So there's these metrics like this. So we need more attention to these metrics and less attention to how many papers people publish. So there's a lot of this. If you
Mm,
want to get research grants and things, you have to have lots of papers published, and your idea counts less. And I know a lot of these funding people will say, well, we don't just pay attention to number of papers published. They always want to say we're not as extreme as you make us out to be. But then when you talk to them more, you realize, well, they may not be
yeah.
paying attention only to that, but it's clearly they're paying way too much attention to that. You really have to really think about
Mm,
the idea, and you have to think about the performance metric. What does this technology have to do before it can be commercialized? They should know that. If you're going to be
mm.
funding technology, you should be understanding where you're trying to go and what you're trying to
Yeah, but that
achieve.
that but that's that it's obvious. If you look at, if you posted the Rummel book, Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, a couple of weeks ago,
Yeah.
a post about that. And if the challenge is funding, all right, then and funding takes papers, then you'll produce more papers. Then that's the strategy you'll apply, and that's why universities adapting that. And I think having have taking that view and saying, okay, this is actually the challenge, right? We need to change some of the ways universities work, maybe make a different subsidy model, or I don't know how we can do that. That's the problem as well, right? Is criticism is one thing, right? Finding the challenges, you're definitely good at finding the challenges, but
Yeah.
how do we then convert that into a strategy that universities can actually
And we've become a very
work on,
superficial
work on?
world and that's what causes people to focus on these superficial things. Uh,
Hmm.
and it's not just the research funding; it's venture capitalists who they want you to set big goals. So that's Rumelt's book.
Hmm.
It's his main point that bad strategies are just goals and not ways of achieving them
Yeah.
goals. And so we have a lot of these kinds of big goals. So one of the goals for ride sharing was we're going to eliminate all uh, privately owned vehicles. When you could never do this because ride sharing means there are more cars driving around without any passengers. So
Hmm.
the very capacity of the city's transportation system goes down. It can handle fewer vehicles. That is really essential. It's been kind of ignored right now because we have a lot of people working from home. But once everybody gets back to work, which will take a while, starts going to the office or going to the factory, wherever they have to go, our cities won't be able to handle it because there's too many people, in ride sharing vehicles or taxis, and they
At
they
the same
need to
time,
invest more in the public transportation system because a lot of the reason why Uber, for example, is profitable now is because the public transportation, all these buses, a lot of them went out of business or cut back capacity significantly during the lockdowns. So if you look at the data from public transportation, it's down by like one third from pre-lockdown, pre-pandemic.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, but that is a problem. There's lower investments in public transportation. That's something we should be looking at more than we should be looking at maybe autonomous vehicles. And I think that the point that made me think about when I was young, I worked in retirement homes as a caregiver to elder people, and people were always saying, okay, we need to get more people working full time because there are a lot of part time workers in this field. And the problem is that, okay, but the elderly people need help at 7 to 9 o'clock in the morning. Then they need a little help around lunch. And then the rest of the day, it's very, very, low maintenance. So, and the same thing with autonomous vehicles. We all need to get it to work at 8 or 9.
Yeah,
So you'll
so it
have
is.
like tons of cars. It's not like, oh, but then we can just utilize the car. You'll have a lot of cars standing there waiting for us to use them, just like we have today with my car in the parking lot, just standing there right now while I'm talking to you. So I don't really think that that will change, or autonomous vehicles will help on that.
No, you're right. I agree.
Mm. So, but okay. So what is the big challenge here in an AI world? I think everyone's Gartner, or I don't know if it was Gartner, so I'm not going to quote that. But someone said $14 trillion market, or
Yeah, those
for
numbers have
AI.
been
So
pushed around.
that's the blue sky objective, right? That's
Yeah,
what we're getting at. The whole world will be AI'd up.
yeah.
Uh,
Back in
what is the real challenge,
2016.
Jeff? And
Well,
what is the real strategy?
it's all incremental, and it's all finding some applications that work. And there's some that work better than others. I think that the creative arts industry, so movies, are a lot better for generative AI because their output is pictures. It's
Yeah,
it's something that's actually created by the generative
yeah,
AI. Very very few industries use images and words. Movies is one of the biggest, but a car making company, and people think that somehow generative AI is going to have this big impact on the car making company. It doesn't help us make cars. It has to help us develop them or maybe fulfill orders, but that's going to require a lot more thought than these people saying that, well, it can allow us to write our emails, it can write emails for us, it can write reports for us. Well, we don't need more emails, we don't need more reports,
yeah.
we need better
What
reports, we need better emails.
what is the car challenge that we're trying to solve with generative AI? That is what you're talking about, right?
Yeah,
What is did the car industry have that challenge before? Or are we just saying let's invent a challenge
yeah,
for car makers now
yeah,
so we can apply generative AI?
yeah,
And that's sort of the problem all around enterprises right now. They're
yeah,
trying to invent,
yeah.
but at the same time there will also be opportunities they will be missing. So there is it's double. I think it's difficult to navigate right now.
We have too many written documents in our world, too
Mm.
many. We don't need to be able to write faster, we need better documents, not not more documents. We need fewer and better documents.
I love that. That's a great point. So, Jeffrey, what would it take for you to return to the optimist you were 20 years ago? I won't accept that you just grown old and you're a boomer now. I need a better answer.
Well, I have to see success, and you know, I may be surprised. There may be something that succeeds. I mean, I probably will be surprised. There'll be something that succeeds. I don't know what it is, but something will happen. I don't know what it is. I haven't found it. I've said I expect something in the movie industry, but that's just one case. Um,
But what about something like cloud computing? That's a big success, isn't it?
yeah,
The
it's
accessibility
already
for
a
everyone to
success.
get
Yeah,
access. Yeah.
it will continue to grow.
So you have successes and something to be optimistic about.
Oh yeah, yeah. But see, most of the things to be optimistic about are the old technologies that continue to grow. So e-commerce continues to grow. Phones continue to be used. Cloud computing continues to grow. So there's a lot of these technologies. Social media continues to grow, even though we don't really want it to
Mm.
grow.
Yeah, but so there are some things that are successful. Are you optimistic? Does some of that make you optimistic? Or what is it that makes you optimistic? You're saying they're successful. So what is it that makes you? I'm just trying to get at what is it that makes Jeffrey be a pessimist or an optimist? And
Well, remember that I'm not saying that there's going to be a big market crash or a big war or anything like that. I'm just
no,
saying that the productivity growth is not going to increase. That there's going to be this rapid uptake of technology. So I'm not saying the world's going to collapse.
no.
I'm not. I don't have this doomsday message that certainly a lot of people have. Certainly, like climate change people, or there's people who talk about wars on all sides that see some
Mm,
doomsday coming from that. I'm not saying they're doomsday, although I will say that if productivity growth continues to be slow, then there will be a lot of losers and a lot of people get angry. There's a lot of
mm,
anger. So that's the real scary thing is that if there isn't a uptick in productivity, if it doesn't grow, and if some countries may actually see a decline in productivity, then there'll be anger, and that's where we're
mm.
afraid. That's where the problem's going to
Yeah,
really
but
emerge.
that's the same I said before, that if we expect technology to fix climate change and it doesn't,
Yeah,
was that a strategy then,
yeah,
right? Or was it just a hype train
yeah.
taking our focus away from the issues we needed to talk about, right? So, Jeff, this has been an awesome episode, and the sound has also gotten better because I think it stopped raining,
It
hasn't
did
it?
stop raining. Yes.
So it's gotten a bit better,
Yeah.
and let's see what I can do in post production as well.
Okay.
But this podcast always ends with me asking a question, and now I'm gonna ask you that question, and I want you to elaborate a little bit on it. So, Jeffrey, what is the only constant?
Well, I think you said physics, chemistry, science is a constant, but also the desire for change and the desire to make money, and people who are afraid of missing out, FOMO, and people who are looking for the greater fool. Uh, so the scams and things. So a lot of those things are all going to continue. They'll, as W.C. Field said once, there's a sucker born every day, and so there'll be somebody in the tech sector trying to fool them.
So the only constant is.
I'm a bit of a pessimist. I agree. Like I said, I've become a pessimist.
So there's a great answer that someone being fooled is sort of the only constant then.
That's one of the constants. I'd rather stick to the laws of physics, the laws of chemistry, biology, things like this.
Great. That's a great answer. Thank you for your time, Jeff, and thank you for being on The Only Constant.
Okay, well, thank you.
You've listened to The Only Constant, a podcast sponsored by Basico.